Wrote this during the COVID pandemic. Our community at this point in COVID in New York City was at the epicenter of a lot of the onset of COVID in the United States. In the first 6 weeks, 30,000 people had died in New York. And our Islamic Center at New York University, in the first couple of weeks, we had 100 people who had either died or lost loved ones before we stopped counting. It was just so many people. And this was the Ramadan immediately after. And by that time, we had had that many more people who had passed, so many who weren't able to attend funerals. They were trying to make sense of just the world. And so I had written this in Ramadan of that year. I said the word spirituality gets thrown around a lot during Ramadan, but its importance has yet to be recognized by most of us. The deepest poverty that is experienced by people in the West is a spiritual poverty. This is not a part of the world that people leave their homes to journey towards in order to find themselves. For that, most people still head eastward. People come here to find wealth and material gain, not meaning and purpose. The two don't have to be mutually exclusive, but when the acquisition of the former comes prior to the cultivation of the latter, we then find systems and structures like those that are built around us. Race and class become the determining factors of who has and who has not. Ethics and morals get put to the side, the masses sway in whichever direction the winds of the privileged blow them in. In the midst of it all, our sense of humanity dies over and over again, for it's not possible to live without a heart, and there is no heart present when there is spiritual poverty. The counter to this is for each of us to aspire towards real richness and not the facade of it. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam said, "Laysa al-ghina an kathat al-arad, walakin al-ghina ghina an-nafs," that true richness is not to have many possessions, but true richness is having a richness of your soul. Our list of dreams and aspirations has to first include the goal of inward contentment in order for us to then seek it out and attain it. More accurately, we probably first need a list of dreams and aspirations. May Allah make us from amongst those who are never afraid to dream. To be one who values people over profits requires a willingness to recognize what really is going on and to make a commitment to live bigger than it. Ramadan affords the opportunity to yield that consciousness and an opening to love something bigger than the world and its temporary offerings. More importantly, it affords the opportunity to simply love in a very real way. The consequences of spiritual poverty are the ailments of being uncaring, indifferent, and arrogant. We're fine with people having access to no health care, for people to live in the rubble of homes, for people to be unjustly incarcerated, while we send billions of dollars in weapons overseas. Our entire healthcare systems, prison systems, educational systems, justice systems, welfare systems, and every system are proof themselves of how inwardly poor we are and how deep our deficit of meaning has reached. I don't want to just be a sexual organ or a stomach or a fleeting desire. I want to live with my heart and experience life through all of my senses. To find meaning by embracing my God-given talents and skills, and to attain purpose by going out and sharing those talents and skills with others unconditionally and simply out of love and it being the right thing to do. I want to be a contributor and not a consumer, a heart and not just a body. I want to be spiritually rich and never spiritually poor, and I hope to use the school of Ramadan to further me along that way. Ameen. The recognition of this as a construct is not meant to be something abstract, but you have different facets that what makes you you. You have a physical, but also an emotional, a mental, and a spiritual. And the challenge with a religion that has ritual to it is that it has the danger of becoming overtly ritualized. It's just about the outward and the external performance, but there's not necessarily a moment to stop and say, well, what's the inner self supposed to be in relation to this, and how does it impact that? I want to move from a place where I simply see and I want to perceive. I don't want to just hear, I want to listen. I don't want to be somebody who just touches. I want to actually feel. You don't want to just eat, you want to taste. And we have a unique capacity in comparison to the rest of creation. The sun doesn't know how beautiful it is when it rises and sets. Only you and I have that capacity. A bird doesn't know how beautiful its song is when it chirps. You and I have that unique ability to experience that. A flower doesn't know how beautiful its fragrance is. You and I are the only ones in creation that have been given the ability to actually take a pause and have that experience. And you can start to understand how this thing of Ramadan impacts you based off of your capacity to perceive. And how you see something tells you not just about who you are, but it tells you a lot about what it is that you're looking at. And ask yourself, why do I see it in that way? I was walking with my kids in a park near our apartment in New York City. And it was very hot. It was the summer. And they said, we want to get ice cream. If you've ever been in New York City, in the parks, there's ice cream vendors all over the place. We got to the ice cream vendor. There was a huge line. And one of my kids said, I don't want to wait in line. And the other kid said, I want ice cream. And so my kid who didn't want to wait in line went back to play. And the other kid went and waited in line with me to get ice cream. We got the ice cream and we went back to where the other kid was playing, and the kid who was now playing said, I wish I had some ice cream. One of them saw the line, the other saw the ice cream. They both were looking at the same thing, but both of them saw it differently. Do you understand what I'm saying? And it's a functionality not of what is outward, because they're looking at the same thing. But two people can see the same thing and experience it entirely differently. And what should a Muslim who believes in Tawheed see certain things as? How is it that some of us see someone and we see them as a potential spouse or partner? But some of us see them and say, I would never let my child marry someone from a different culture. You see the same thing, but you see it differently. Somebody would say, I want to invite someone to break fast in my home. And somebody would say, I would never invite somebody who came from a different social class to have a meal in my house. The person sees the Prophet kissing his grandchildren. And he says, I don't kiss any of my kids. And the Prophet says, there is no rahmah for one who has no rahmah. How is it that one person sees it one way and the other sees it another way? It's a function of what's going on in here. And this is the mechanism through which we synthesize information, how it is that we take what it is that we are now absorbing and consuming from all of our sensory perception. And you become desensitized to certain realities because you become bombarded by them again and again and again. But the gateway that is controlling what you consume in terms of food and drink is just one avenue. Now the idea is, how do I elevate it? And I start to remove myself from certain things so I can see the impact that it's actually having on my heart. Does this make sense? My son is 9 years old. My daughter is 12. And a couple of years ago, when my son was 7 and my daughter was 10, I was leaving the house at a time when my daughter, my son, and my wife were about to start watching a movie together. And they were really excited because since they were little, my wife had told them different things about this movie. When I came back about an hour and a half later, I could tell that my son had been crying while I was gone. And I said to him, Kareem, what's the problem? And he said, nothing, Baba. And I said, I can tell that something is wrong. And he said, no, it's fine. And I said, tell me. And I went to him and I held him close to me. And he said, in the movie that they were watching, there was a child that had special needs. And he said the father in the movie got so frustrated with his son that in the movie, the father slapped his son. And then my son started crying immensely. He said, Baba, How could a father hit their child? It's haram. لم يضرب رسول الله امرأة ولا غلاما ولا ولدا قط. This is Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha saying this. The messenger of God never struck a woman or a servant or a child ever. And anybody who thinks that they know how to do Islam better than the Prophet, you should realize that our Prophet did not do this or condone this behavior. But my son is consuming visually. He has never seen or could even imagine that a parent who is given the blessing of a child would actually treat their child in this way. And I want you to think, if you saw abuse or violence in front of you, would it make your eyes cry? But my son's heart is an innocent heart. He's 7 years of age. And for the first time now, he's consuming this type of thing, and his heart is responding the way a heart should respond when it sees this kind of vile behavior. And our overt consumption of so many things that are atrocious bring us to places where it numbs us in places that we're supposed to have wakefulness. I spoke at the RIS conference here in Toronto in December. Some of you have probably gone to it, downtown Toronto. It's like 20, 30,000 people in the room at any given time, right? It was freezing in Toronto in those days. And when I was walking around the streets of Toronto, there were literally on the streets people asleep, and their bodies were not pale white. They were turning blue and purple. They had no blankets to cover themselves. They were in a place where cardboard boxes that had been broken apart because they held the products that we order online through things like Amazon that had holes cut in them because that's just how we cut open our boxes to get our stuff. That's what they were using to cover themselves. And I was walking through the streets and I'm thinking, man, there's 30,000 of us in this building. How is it possible that these human beings are asleep in this cold weather? Some of them are not going to just get sick. Some of them will pass away as a result of this. I was in Chicago 2 weeks ago, and I was sharing a little bit of this at a relief banquet. And there was a man who came up to me afterwards. In Chicago, it was -4 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but it was freezing. And he said part of his volunteer efforts is that he goes to tents where homeless people are, and their bodies have hardened from the cold, and his job is to take them from the tents, hardened, and carry them away to where they need to go. When I was in Toronto, the next person that I saw and I had a one-on-one conversation with, and I said, it's crazy that there's people like who are going to die from this cold outside, and they have cardboard boxes that they're using as blankets. And I said, how do people deal with this homelessness issue here in Toronto? And he said to me that it's such a problem and it makes life so difficult for us. And I said, how does it make life difficult for you? And he said, there's all these people sleeping on the street, and it makes me and my family uncomfortable. I can't even go to the restaurants I want to go to because I'm worried about what somebody might do or that what my children might see. And I said, man, I hope I never think about the world through my stomach. People are dying from the cold, and this guy is upset because somebody on the sidewalk is getting in his way to go to a restaurant. And you all are choosing to be here on a Sunday night in the middle of the night. True submission means allowing for yourself to not be in a place where you are burdened by rhetoric from external spaces that are purposeful in making you internalize loathing. But on your own terms, you embrace capacity for change. And you don't have to have a default that says I'm a bad person, but a default that understands myself in this prism of spiritual refinement that does not have any page in the Mus'haf that says perfectionism is what we're supposed to pursue as Muslims. but I can be a good person. A good person can always be better. And what did you and I fundamentally do, man? That we're sitting here in this place, protected by the weather outside from us. Like, by virtue of what were we given this? And with a spiritual richness, I can start to think with an air of gratitude that Allah endowed me with certain things. How do I now start to overcome what creates hardness within my heart? And I allow for it to be in a state of wakefulness, and I go out and I start to engage the world the way a Muslim is supposed to engage the world. Not living in a survival mode where every masjid does the same summer camp every year. Not in a place where I have insularity, but I'm bold enough to go and live differently, right? I said this a little bit in between the fifth and for the first 4 rakahs of Taraweeh and the next 4 rakahs. Like, be different, be strange. If it's strange to take care of people who are poor, be strange. If it's strange to visit people who are sick in the hospital, be strange. If it's strange to take care of the orphans, if it's strange to take care of people who are survivors of abuse, be strange. If it's strange to be kind and compassionate and considerate and not to center the self, but to live beyond supremacist systems that are built on a modern day shirk of egocentricity and whiteness, be strange. And in Ramadan, you have the opportunity to allow for the heart to be sovereign and consciousness to be something that you know you will experience. Have any of you ever felt weird eating food on the day of Eid? In the morning, it's Eid, and you're putting something in your mouth, and it feels strange. You've had that experience? It's not strange. And that's your nafs and shaitan trying to take back your gains from Ramadan. For the first time in your life, after 30 days of preparation, you actually have mindfulness around consumption. That's taqwa. And in that moment, if you say it's strange, you're going to dilute it and you're going to retreat away from it. You want to be somebody who thinks twice about, should I be eating right now? Do I need to put this into my body? And when you experience that moment of a second thought on it, that means that your heart is now in a state of wakefulness. And you're in a place now where it's giving you opportunity to choose and determine, am I going to go back to a place where mindlessness is the default in my consumption, or am I going to consume in a different capacity? Am I going to have a different level of engagement around it? And in order to get to there, step number 1 is I want to be spiritually rich. I don't want to be spiritually poor. Do you want to be racist? And would you say somebody is racist, they're spiritually rich or spiritually poor? Do you want to be abusive or oppressive? Do you want to make justifications about not doing what you have the ability to do? Because judgment isn't about what I did and did not do, but judgment also includes what I could have done, but I still didn't get it done. And asking myself, why? And this aspect of the heart and the state of the heart and understanding where I rely on things that are outward alone and spiritual poverty is an important thing. What I want us to do, so that I'm not just talking at you, in our community when I do halakas, I have people talk to each other every 15, 20 minutes so they can make concrete ideas. You don't want to treat religion as a source of entertainment. You want it to be a source of education and allow for it to be something that you actually apply. Contentment is rooted in keeping what you know and how you act on what you know and putting them close together. And you know, some of you started this Ramadan exactly the same way you started last Ramadan. The first few days you had a headache because you couldn't drink coffee. Why did you wait? It was the same thing as last year. You learned that Ramadan 11 days later last year had a longer day of fasting and you could fast in it. Why didn't you fast after Ramadan? You know something, but you're not acting on what you know. You know that you're different when you're engaging Quran, when you're in community and you're sitting with people that you don't have to explain yourself to be. But certain things get in the way. And some of it is rooted that after we have exercised our heart for a month, we start to not continue, not because we don't have capacity, but we've never really thought about the processes that we're going through and how it's actually yielding what it's intended to yield. So what I'd like for you to do, just for 2 minutes, turn to the persons next to you. What are you taking away so far? And the idea is to do 2 things. One, you want to get comfortable in communicating what you think about, like your thoughts. It cannot be that somebody else always tells you what to think, because you could dress how someone else dresses, you could eat what someone else eats. You cannot believe something because somebody else believes it. Belief is subjective, it comes from within. And that sense of conviction can only be refined if you get to a place where you start to articulate ideas. The second part to it is deepening in an empathetic mode of listening. You're listening to understand, not listening to respond. And if you're commonplace is when somebody talks, you interrupt, or you refute, or you're always pushing down, is telling you something about your heart. Because we have a lot of hadith that we could talk about where the Prophet says being argumentative and quarrelsome is not good. And so you just exercise stillness and you let the person feel as if that you are somebody who actually wants to hear what they are saying. So ideally in pairs, no more than 3. Let's turn to the persons next to us. What are you taking away from some of what I'm saying so far? What is it bringing up for you? And then let's come back and discuss a couple of other things. Go ahead. So, what are some of the things that are coming up for people so far before we jump into a couple of other things? Maybe we can hear from 2 or 3 people. What are you taking away so far? Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. First of all, Jazakallah khair for being here. It's been very informative. We were just talking about the topic of giving charity, as you mentioned, to when let's say you go to downtown Toronto, you see the homeless people on the streets. But we were thinking of it from a different perspective, in the sense that the Prophet ﷺ said that it's better to give, if you're doing sadaqah, it's better to give it to your relatives, or if you have family in need, it's better to give it to them. So I think of it from a perspective of, for example, the people in Gaza, or the people in Sudan, or even the people in Kashmir, or Uyghur in China. So that's is it better to sort of donate it there from that perspective, because you're sort of doing 2 things? You're doing sadaqah, you're doing charity, and at the same time you're upholding the relationship between you and your relatives. So that's sort of the point that we were stuck on, in the sense that which is better. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm not sure if that's something you could clarify on.
Yeah, we could talk about that. But what else did people come away with? And maybe not questions, but like things not framed in a question mode.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, me and my friend, we were discussing, hypothetically, if there was a man who's not a Muslim and he were to watch a man downtown Toronto that is a Muslim, as a Muslim, we should act like this is the last Muslim the guy will ever speak, and he'll be in front of the world and he'll tell everyone this is how every Muslim is. So you have to move like you are the last Muslim the man will meet. To add on to what you said, you have to question, why is it strange to do good in this world? So as a man that has children, you know that people learn from action. So as Muslims, we have to start doing these strange things in front of one another to make it not strange and make it the norm, inshallah.
So just really quickly, because these 2 things I think are important to clarify. You could disagree with me, right? I'm just telling you what I think. If somebody is dying on the street in front of you, you don't help them because of what they might think of Islam. Do you understand? You don't help them or choose not to help them because I'm thinking about like the ajr that'll come to me twofold. The intentionality is already now rooted in what it is that exactly what I'm saying. This is the mindset of what exists in systems rooted in anti-blackness. And in this community, we're in a place where you are the children of demographics that experienced colonization, slavery, all kinds of things. And you have to remember who your teacher is, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And understanding fundamentally that the responsibility goes in both directions. And if I fundamentally know what it is that I have the ability to do and how it is that I alter consumption and worldviews, to be able to say, like, this is a human being in front of me, right? لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. That not one of you will have complete iman until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he says the word brother in that hadith is in reference to your brother in humanity, not your brother in faith. Some people would say it's in reference to your brother in faith, but the way that they reconcile this is there's other hadith that you find in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad that talk about like honoring the rights of your neighbors and honoring the rights of people, and that they all speak to each other in certain ways. Do you know? And my intention is just I simply do right because it's the right thing to do. And if I get to a place where I'm intellectualizing it too much, I have to see where does my nafs come in and where does shaitan's waswasa come in. Because the idea is not to only get me to do wrong, but to not do as much right as I can do. And if I have the capacity to do this much good and Iblis gets me to do this much good, it's still not what it is that it should be. Do you see? And we get to these places of conjecturing. You want to think like ethics are situational. And this is not a religion that is only about do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs and the fiqh of certain things. And your generation grows up in a hyper-legalized understanding of Islam and a hyper-creed-focused understanding of Islam. Creed, aqidah, is not the same thing as iman. May Allah make us the strongest of the believers. I work at a university. I could put you in front of people who are not Muslim, who know our creed better than any one of us. They don't have iman in it. To have faith in something is different, and faith is what's most important to inform practice and ritual and decisions and choices. Do you see? And the overt intellectualization of things gets us to a place where at times we become paralyzed. So can somebody say, like, is it better for me to do X or Y? It's not a quantifiable metric. Do you see these two cups that are in front of me? Here's a cup of water and here's a cup of tea, right? They are quantifiably able to be measured because there's an amount in it that can increase or decrease. This is how most of us see the world. Like, which one is better? The one that has more water in it. So I'm going to take the water cup that's more full. Everything is not measured in quantifiable metrics. Say you had 2 job offers that you needed. One job was stable. You're going to become an accountant. Somebody's going to pay you $100,000 a year. And then you have something you're passionate about, right? You want to become like an activist. And you have an opportunity to become a professional activist. You can work with a relief agency or something like this, and they'll pay you substantially less. And you're now trying to decide, which do I do? Am I going to become the professional activist, or am I going to become the professional accountant? And you don't know what decision to make. And it gives you the understanding that they're both hard decisions to lie on. And then the accounting position comes and says, I'm going to give you $30,000 more to be an accountant. If both of those things were equal in the beginning, and you couldn't determine which one to go to because they were both equivalent, so to speak, then the addition of a benefit to one of them should make one greater quantifiably than the other one, right? But then you still can't decide. This one's now $130,000, but I really want to do this one. Because it's not a quantifiable metric of assessment, it's qualitative. You're making a decision through ethics. And that's what this religion is based upon. It's based upon ethics. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِيُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, the Prophet says, that I was sent to just perfect ethical conduct. You look at the practice you have through hadith like that. And everything is now not going to be black and white and cookie cutter. Ethics are situational. I don't talk to my 9-year-old the way I talk to his grandmother, right? You treat different people in different ways. This is how ethics are applied. But consciousness is important because when we live in a world that is reductive and black and white, we intellectualize in ways that fundamentally we shouldn't intellectualize. Somebody's going to die from the cold. And when I stand in front of Allah, I'm going to say, Ya Allah, I did that because of what? And sometimes you just do it because it's the right thing to do, man. And how do you make somebody know that you're seeing them? You don't have to go and find the solution for every person. I had a student at New York University. It was freezing in New York. We had a polar vortex. She went around and she said to classmates of hers, if you have an extra pair of socks, winter socks, give them to me. She got thousands of socks from different people. Look at how many of you are in this room. All of you have an extra pair of socks, likely. Some of you have 2 extra pairs of socks. One of you just has to think from your heart, from a visionary standpoint, go to everybody and say, next week, everybody bring a blanket to the masjid. I'm going to pack my car up with it, and I'm going to drive around downtown Toronto and give everybody who's got a piece of cardboard on them an actual blanket to sleep with. You can't open up the mushaf and find a verse that says, this is how you cure hunger. But you can find a lot of verses that say somebody who believes in Tawheed, this is what they're supposed to do when they know somebody's hungry. And the idea of what our text teaches us. In Surah As-Saf, there's a verse that says, Inna Allah yuhibbu alladhina yuqatiluna fi sabilihi saffan. That Allah loves those who fight in His way in rows and ranks, disciplined. But the latter part of that verse, relevant to this, كَأَنَّهُمْ بُنْيَانٌ مَرْسُوس, like they're a building that's marsus. For a building to be marsus, it means it's concrete, it's solidified. And if you have a solid foundation in a building, it's because the bricks that are next to each other, they are the ones that are helping each other. Not that I'm a brick down here, but I only care about the brick up there. Because the brick up there is going to fall down if you're not connected to the bricks that are local to you. That's what marsus means. Do you see? Jibreel alayhi salam comes and speaks to the Prophet about the right your neighbor has over you, to the extent that the Prophet says that I thought he was going to make inheritance a part of what the neighbor also gets from us. And in our tradition, the neighbor is 40 homes in the right, 40 homes in the left, in front of you, behind you. Everybody that you're sharing space with, man. And it doesn't qualify it based off of shared race, shared culture, shared ethnicity, shared class, shared religion, shared creed. These are not Muslim ethics that say that I put conditions on my giving. And sometimes the bricks that we love the most that are miles away from us, they're suffering because we're not taking care of what's close to us. And we're not doing right by those that are around us. كَأَنَّهُمْ بُنْيَانٌ مَرْصُوصٌ. You have to be a building that is built solid from the foundation up. And if there's holes at the bottom of it, everything is going to fall. Does that make sense? The heart is an important thing, and you want to experience what it is that lightens and illuminates the heart. Dunun al-Misri rahimahullah, he is a spiritual master of our tradition. He is Nubian, he is black. And I say this purposefully because when we think about scholars of our past and people of the past, we have our own stereotypes that creates a racialization of our faith on its own that then demeans and delegitimizes and makes things like skin color and gender symbolic of religiosity. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha is more knowledgeable than any of us in this room. There were people who were from the companions of the Prophet who were also from various racial, cultural backgrounds. And it gets left out consciously or unconsciously, but it impacts dynamics of how we then connect to one another. There's a lot of Muslims you could go to all over the world. They won't pray behind somebody who comes from a different race than they do. They won't have people in their houses who come from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds than their own. This is a problem. Our Prophet tells us explicitly it's a sign from the days of Jahiliyyah. May Allah protect us from it. Dunun al-Misri rahimullah, a spiritual master of our tradition, he talks about a concept called the qaswatul qalb, the hardness of the heart. It's a Quranic concept. And he says 5 things that you want to think about implementing practically so that you get rid of hardness of your heart. And hardness is not all because of our doing, right? If you grow up in ways where people yell at you all the time, you live in societies where people demean you all the time, you're in places where anxiety and stress just plagues your mind, it can create a lot of burden. There's a lot of us in this room who, when we're children, our child hearts take in adult emotions in ways that no child's heart should take. We have elders who yell at each other, who yell at us, who don't talk well, and it starts to impact our inner self. The Qaswatul Qalb, Dhunun al-Misri, he says there are certain things that you can do to deal with it. إِذَا رَدْتَ أَن تَذْهَبَ قَسَاوَةُ قَلْبِكَ, he says that if you have a desire for the hardness of your heart to go away, the first advice he gives, that many of us are doing, فَأَدِمِ الصِّيَامِ, then endure in fasting. Anybody who is serious about their spiritual diet and their heart had a regular fast in our religious tradition. Not just obligatory, but voluntary. And every one of you who has the medical capacity, the physical capacity, you are post-pubescent, and it's fard on you to fast in these days and nights of Ramadan, you're observing what you do, you can fast outside of the month too. And you have to make a commitment now that as a Muslim, you start to see your practice not just for your sake, but for all of us. Your fajr is not just for you, your fajr is for each one of us in this room. And when you do not get to a place where you see how we all impact each other, and you let go of what you can only ascertain, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, is true for the siyam outside of Ramadan also. The companions asked the Prophet about fasting outside of Ramadan, and he tells them to fast the middle days of the month, the 3 days where the moon is at its largest, the white days, the lunar days. Ya Rasulullah, we can do more than that. He says fast on Mondays and Thursdays. Ya Rasulullah, I can do more than that. He says fast every other day, as was the sunnah of the Prophet Dawood alayhi salam. And then he says don't do more than that. That companion is recorded as saying later in his life, I wish I had taken one of the other fasts and done what the Prophet had advised. He stays consistent with it, but understand here again, it's not quantifiable, it's qualitative. Our Prophet starts with 3 days, goes to 2 days a week, so 8 days a month, then every other day, 15 days out of a month. He starts from the lesser and goes to the higher because it's not a competition. You want to do what you do well, and it's not just quantitative. I read this much and prayed this much, but then you didn't do it again for a whole year. You build it habitually. And you want to be in a place where you control your stomach. And this is something that we do that no other animals do. We're not the strongest of animals. We can't fly on our own volition. We can't swim in the depths of the sea. We're the only animals that after our stomachs are full, we keep feeding ourselves. And you think about it, man. Every time I come to Toronto, there's like 30 new restaurants that open. Look at how many of you are in this room. If you were bold enough to turn to the people around you and say, what are we going to all do together with the strength and energy we have as young people in this community to leave the world better than the state we found it in the legacy of the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You don't want your city to be known for its halal restaurants only, and that's the only contribution that Muslims have made, a source of just feeding our stomachs. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she says that this will become one of the first innovations in Islam. People will just fill their stomachs to their full. It's crazy. Our Prophet would make dua to, Ya Allah, make the rizq of Ahl Muhammad just sufficient enough. And when you don't live beyond means, meaning like you're spending more than you have, but you live beyond means in the sense that you're eating more and consuming more than you need, this is where things become problematic. And this is where I then have to choose, do I give only here or only there? Food for one is enough for two. Food for two is enough for four. I just got to be serious about my spirituality. Fa'adim siyam, you find hardness, then endure in fasting. And you experience it now. You know you're different in the last 10 nights of Ramadan than you are in the first days. The fasting is doing something to your inner self. Why would you leave it behind at the end of the month? He says, then if you still find hardness in your heart, فَإِذَا وَجَدْتَ قَسَاوَةً فَأَطْلِ الْقِيَامِ, then make your standing longer, referring to the Qiyamul Layl. You're going to pray Qiyam near. There's a paradox in our spiritual tradition that when the night reaches its darkest of shades, it creates now the most potential for luminosity of your inner self. I don't know why this is. Allah is the one who determined when the barakah is there and when the du'as are more readily accepted. A companion asked the Prophet for advice, and he says to him, Ya Abdullah, la takun mithl fulan, kana yakumul layl, wa taraka qiyamul layl. That, oh Abdullah, don't be like so and such and such. He used to stand at night for prayer, and then he abandoned the night prayer. The difference between tahajjud and qiyamul layl is whether you sleep or not. If you sleep and wake up, that's tahajjud. If you don't sleep and you pray, that's qiyamul layl. There's barakah in both of them. You are not fighting with anybody or competing with anybody. Technically, anything you pray after the Isha prayer can count as qiyam. So you know yourself now and you work towards where you want to be. So if you can pray some extra rak'ahs after you pray Isha and you want to motivate yourself, then you think about your sisters and brothers in Gaza, who right now, man, they're praying Taraweeh in the rubble of homes. May Allah give us iman like that. And they're going to keep doing it after Ramadan is done too. The nights were given to you and you build it up for yourself, but in the nature of, I don't want a heart that compels my body to be okay with gossiping and backbiting and lying and cheating. So the second thing, you find hardness, then you make your standing longer. And he says, if you still find hardness, a third advice, فَذَرِ الْحَرَامِ, then refrain from that which is haram. There's not any two of us in this room that would have a conversation that is not two sinners talking to each other. And if you think you don't do haram, you're lying. And lying is haram. So then that's how it works. But in understanding that the basis of it gets confusing because words have meaning and we don't know the meanings of things. And you got to get to a place at this juncture in your spiritual trajectory that you have working definitions. If I asked you, what does the word haram mean? Do you know what it means in a technical sense and in a literal sense? I got 3 minutes left, so I'm just going to run through these things. Haram is not just the eating of pork or the consumption of wine or the committing of zina, but gossiping is haram, backbiting is haram, racism is crazy haram, abuse is haram. There were certain things the companions struggled with, and this is what made them the best of generations. It's not that they didn't make mistakes, they slipped and they got back up. And the Prophet walked with them through their struggles, but he got upset in certain instances, and anger was apparent on his face. And the anger came when the haram was somebody abusing someone or being racist against somebody. So it doesn't matter if your grandfather's going to be upset or what people would think. Racism is wrong. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's just what it is. And you want to roll the dice and stand in front of Allah? Shaitan got kicked out of Jannah because he said where I'm from is better than where Adam is from. And if you're doing the same thing, then you're going to have a rude awakening. May Allah protect us from it. Fadhar al-haram, you want to be in a place where you relate to it in a systematic way. Ittaqal maharim takun abada nas, the Prophet says, refrain from the haram. You'll be the most virtuous of people. So you start to take a step back. A lot of people turn to haram not because they're bad people, but because there's an absence of community support. And you got to be nicer to each other and kind to each other and really check in on one another. Learn the names of the people you're going to pray with. Don't assess and judge. It's a product of your heart. If you see somebody and the first thing you see is here's they're doing this wrong and that wrong and this wrong and that wrong. I'm going to take like more than 3 minutes, maybe like 5 minutes, not so much more. Is that okay? Yeah? Dahlia's the boss, so she said it's fine. A companion comes to the Prophet and says, Ya Rasulullah, you have to make zina halal for me. It's a hadith. It's a young man. And other people say, like, why are you saying these things? The Prophet says, come close to where I am. And then he asks him a series of questions. Would you want this for your mother? Would you want this for your sister? The man says, like, no, Ya Rasulullah. Like, he's saying, like, I would die for you, O Messenger of God. He loves the Prophet. And at the end of it, the Prophet puts his hand on his chest, makes dua for him in his struggle, and then the hadith says that he doesn't have this challenge anymore. In the entirety of the hadith, the Prophet doesn't use the word haram once. Do you see? He's the best of teachers, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What would happen if somebody walked in this door and was like, guys, you got to make zina halal for me? Do you know? He's talking with vulnerability about a struggle he has. There's not a purpose outlined in the Quran. It talks to you about istikhlaf, ibtila, istimar, ibadah. Show me a verse that says the reason you were created is to pursue the futile pursuit of perfection. You're gonna make mistakes. You just have to be open to the idea that the haram you engage in is gonna come back and leave darkness on your heart. And that's going to impact it. So fadar al-haram, the fourth thing he says, if you still find hardness, fasil al-arham, reestablish the bonds of kinship. There's not a prophet of God that we're taught about in the Quran that we don't see has a family issue. Adam alayhi salam has one son that kills the other. Ibrahim alayhi salam's father is amongst those who throw his son into a fire. Yusuf alayhi salam's brothers throw him in a well. Their father Yaqub alayhi salam cries himself blind as a result of his distress. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam has uncles who are his greatest adversaries. Families are hard. And you work in the prism of reality. Islam is a reality-based religion. I sit with people all day and all night talking one-on-one and listening to them. I don't like to generalize. The gross majority of issues that come into my office are people who have family issues. If somebody did not treat you well, you have to let that trauma stop with you. And you don't pass the hurt on to another generation that comes. I'm sorry if elders in your life don't tell you that they love you. You have to tell young people in your life that you love them. The Prophet told his grandsons that he loved them. And look at the strength and courage that they stand with. It makes a big difference. And people are putting things in your heart, it's not okay. Then you get the support and help that you need. Forgiveness is not a responsibility, it's a right. And forgiveness is for the forgiver, not the one being forgiven. It takes you from anger to calm. It's the same people on both ends. You don't want that toxicity. Fasil al-arham, if you have the benefit of being an elder to someone or the power dynamic, you do not get to take on a role that is godlike, God forbid. Disobedience and disagreement are two different things. And hurting hearts can create hardness. And Dunun al-Misri is saying, if you find hardness, then look at what's happening in your family relations. And then the last thing he says, if you still find that hardness, فَأَدِّبْ بِالْأَيْطَامِ, then be gentle to the orphan. And the literal example is one not to undermine. Foster care, adoption, these are things that you can do in our religion. In New York City, my wife and I are foster parents. She works with children who are survivors of abuse. There's hardly any Muslims in the foster care system. We took our kids to Florida for a vacation, and we got a text message. A young girl by the name of Hira Anwar, 14 years of age. I share her name because the New York Times and the Independent wrote articles. Her father took her on a trip to Pakistan as a vacation. That was the guise. And when they got to Pakistan, he killed her in an honor killing. May Allah raise her from the shuhada. She's got two siblings that went into foster care in a part of New York. And we got reached out to in New York City. And New York is an entire state, it's big. And they were placed with Hindu families. And not to say that those people were bad, because look, they're the ones that are in the foster care system. There was no Muslims in the foster care system. And it goes back to some of what we're talking about today. Islam does not need us to make it look good. Islam is good. People who are racist are going to make you doubt yourself always. Forget them. You live for something bigger than this world. Let them have this world. And understand that there's responsibility to who we have here locally. The hadith tells us the way we look into the heavens and see the stars shining down to us, when the angels look down in this world, the homes that have orphans being taken care of in them, they shine to the angels the way the stars shine to us. You can only live in one room in your house at a time. And if you make yourself inconvenient, the hadith says that the prophet is going to be like this with the one who takes care of the orphan, right? So why don't more of us do it? Everything cannot just be about learning the fiqh of wudu for the rest of our lives. At some level, you have to actually start acting on what the tradition tells us. You have a beautiful masjid, people have built this stuff out, you now take it to the next place, and it starts from here. So these 5 things, I'm going to end here. I'm so sorry. I don't want to get you in trouble, right? What does he say? فَأَدْمِ الصِّيَامِ, endure in fasting. أَطْلِ الْقِيَامِ, make your standing longer. ذَرَ الْحَرَامِ, refrain from the haram. سِلِ الْأَرْحَامِ, establish the bonds of kinship. أَلْطِفْ بِالْأَيْطَامِ, be kind to the orphan. Go do acts of generosity, man. Be a contributor, not just a consumer. And inshallah, your heart is going to benefit the most. If I can make requests of you, when you're standing and you're making dua tonight, make dua for yourselves in specific, that Allah enables you to not be afraid to be a person today who is fearful of meeting the person you can become tomorrow. It is beautiful to see how many of you are sitting in this room. This world wants you to live and walking on eggshells. Don't be scared. You have been given the gift of Iman. Let it be a source of empowerment. And you walk on this world with a recognition that you're just living for something bigger than it. And you'll be astonished at what all of you in this room, if you came together on real principles of truth, mercy, and compassion, could build for the people in this country. If it's not Muslims who are doing it, who else is going to do it? And if I could ever be helpful to you in anything, please let me know. This is the only time that we're meant to be together. I pray inshallah ta'ala, Allah Azza wa Jal gathers us all together again in the best of places in the world beyond this one. But please keep me in your du'as. You and your loved ones will be in mine. Wallahu ta'ala alim wa billahi tawfiq. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu.
Anonymous question through our link tree, and it has the link to send the anonymous questions. We'll first start off with a question from the forum. If I can have everyone's attention, please. So the first question is, like the homeless man sleeping outside, how do we continue to have faith in moments we might not understand? For example, a mother with a special needs child.
Well, everybody has reasonable faith, right? And the idea is to think out, what are some of the obstacles in building that? What's reasonable faith? Like, you come into this masjid, you believe the lights are going to turn on when you hit the switch. Why do you believe that? That's just reasonable faith. Yaqeen is believing in Allah the way you believe that the lights are going to turn on when you hit the switch. Do you know? And it's hard when realities are tough. Like tomorrow, I'm going to speak at an iftar for an organization called Smile. And they work with Muslims who have special needs and disabilities. And I asked a parent that I know in Canada, like, does this organization get support? And he said no. And I said, why? And he said, because only parents who have children with special needs support them. Everybody who does not have a child with special needs just thinks it's not a big deal. Now that mother is in a place where she has to deal with realities of certain things on her own. Our masajid built out with a sense of understanding that there's people who have special needs, and the pinnacle of a community is only reached when the most underserved and underprivileged needs are being met. Who fundamentally cares if we have $1 million chandeliers and there's people who don't have homes to sleep in at night? And empathy is about recognizing that I suspend the nafs and everything that feeds and fuels it. And I then am now in a place where I live hadith that say, for example, the son of Adam will be spoken to by Allah. You know, you did not feed me when I was hungry. You did not give me drink. You know, you are Rabbul Alameen. How can I feed you? My servant was hungry and you were not there. Had you gone to feed him, you would have found me there, right? This woman is going to be in a place where her exhaustion comes from an absence of our communal support of her. And she can stand on the day of judgment and say, they built, but they did not think about my needs and my child's needs in the midst of that building. And as she gets weary and tired, the exhaustion in her head is going to translate into a lot of the ways we think when we have emotions and we're tired and we're exhausted, and we say, I must be low in my iman. But that's just what we are. To be human is to be emotional. The Prophet ﷺ was the most balanced of individuals. His contentment coexisted with sadness and joy and happiness. And as you start to move forward, it's beautiful that when we were here today, there's a sign interpreter, but now it's about other accessibility, and you keep building and you keep growing in different ways, so nobody has to carry certain things by themselves. And it's not easy, man. I've spoken to caregivers who have children who have special needs. If you have a child whose mind functions at the level of a 5-year-old, it's different when they're 7, 8, 9, 10. But now you're a 60-year-old mother, and your 35-year-old son has the mind of a 5-year-old, but he has the body of a 35-year-old. He's 6 foot tall. He's as strong as a 35-year-old man. He still needs you to help him take a bath. When he gets sad, he still wants to get into your arms. When he's upset, he's going to throw a tantrum like he's 5 years old. How many iftars do you think that mother goes to, given the reality of what she has as a child? How often do you think she could come and pray tarawih in a masjid? Do you think people are excited to say, come over to my place? That's why love is a critical variable to all of this. And understanding where and how we follow in the legacy of the Prophet of God. And somebody might not be able to make sense of things because they're dealing with it on their own. And we don't want people to deal with things on their own. We want to be able to think about what it is and how we can build for them effectively. If you are in that situation on the other end of it, understanding that reflection and contemplation upon who you know Allah to be. And I find solace in the fact that theology helps me make sense of this world. And I've sat with people. I went to the Rafah border in 2023. I went and visited children from Gaza before last Ramadan, 2024, who had severe medical needs. The people you see in your social media feeds who are missing eyes and limbs, I sat with them directly. I've been with people in the aftermath of natural disaster as we're going through the rubble of their homes, not only to get belongings, but whatever remains of their loved ones we can find. And I still hear them saying, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. And I wonder, how do they have iman like that? A lot of us learn words like fard and haram before we're taught who the divine is. You're taught to pray your sunnah prayers before you're taught whose sunnah you actually follow. And I want you to really think, if I asked you, who is God to you, what would you say? Not somebody else's answer, but if we pass the mic around and not just rotely regurgitated text, but something that gives an indication that this is the God that I worship. And contemplation and reflection is built into Hadith Qudsi. Ana inda dhanni abdi bi, the Hadith says, I am as my servant thinks I am. So the God that you believe Allah to be is the one that you worship. And if you believe in a God that's an angry old man in the sky looking for a reason to punish you, that's the God that you believe in. But our Prophet taught us about a God that loves us more than a mother loves her child. And I have to unlearn certain things in order to learn. And then I find solace in the fact that no matter what's happening, my God sees it all. And we're going to have a day of judgment that's not just about accountability, but every question of why is going to be answered and balance is going to be restored. And then this mother who was left hanging. I know I talk a lot. I'm sorry, man. I don't mean to stress you out, right? Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, to give you a story to illustrate the point, his father is Amr ibn al-As. Amr ibn al-As is a companion of the Prophet of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is appointed a governor towards the end of his life. And as he's getting old, Abdullah sees his father and he's in a state of disarray. He's distraught and he wonders if he's about to pass. And when he asks his father what's going on, his father says, I lived in 3 states in this world. There was a time where I was the staunchest enemy of the Prophet of God. That he was amongst the people that went all the way to Abyssinia to bring people back to Mecca to make life hard for them. And when the Najashi said on day 1, they can have sanctuary in my kingdom, and the Meccans were ready to go, Amr ibn al-As says, I'm going to try again tomorrow, and I'm going to do whatever I can to make life hard for them and bring them back to Mecca. The second state, he says, is when I became Muslim. And he said, had I died in that state, perhaps I would have had hope. But he said, this third state now, he's a governor. I have people that have rights over me. And all these people are going to come on the day of judgment, and they're going to say whether I honored those rights or not. You might not have chosen to live in this place, but your Islam has to be a choice, and it cannot just be about the performance of prayers in the nights of Ramadan. And this is what I was trying to say before. Like, being Muslim in here is one thing, being Muslim out there is something totally different. And people have rights over us. This mother with child with special needs has rights over us. And I got to be able to think about the people that I don't share certain things with, and not just the people who I share certain things with. If I only love the parts of you that remind me of myself, then I'm only loving myself in a weird way, right? But if I love you as a whole person, then I see you, all of you, and I don't have to go through what you go through in order to be where you're at. And then think about what I build for you. And then it weakens people and they get exhausted. And then they turn to a place of self-doubt in that exhaustion. And Shaitan knows exactly what he's doing. May Allah protect us from his waswasa. And he can isolate people and get into his head. Alladhi yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas, and knock on our chest where we're most insecure. And it's going to make us think that either I'm not right for this religion or this religion's not right for me. Or just because I'm in a moment of exhaustion, that means like I'm in a state of weakness in my iman. And all this woman needs, man, is for the rest of us to actually uphold the honorific title of being a sister and brother to her. Does that make sense? And you should come to this dinner tomorrow, right? You're here in the middle of the night on a Sunday. I don't know what you all have to do on a Monday morning that you all are here right now at 1 o'clock in the morning, right? But if you could be here on a Sunday night, you could be there at 6 p.m. tomorrow. You just have to ask yourself why. Like, why would I not be supporting these types of initiatives? Because it's not the norm. And they're going to get the ajr. Inshallah, 50 years from now, every masjid in Toronto will have accessibility for people with disabilities and special needs because of their efforts. And if you have to make it about yourself, you want to get in at the ground level when something is starting, because you're then part of the ones who put it into practice, and everybody who acts on it after, you get some of the reward for it. Be strange. Kun fi dunya ka'annaka gharib. Who cares if anybody else goes? You got to know your ethics and values, and you just do what's right because it's the right thing to do. Do you see what I mean?
Jazakallah, Imam Khalid. Since we are pushing past time, I would like to request if you can help us conclude the night with a dua, inshallah.
Oh, that's a bad idea too, man. My du'as are like 50 minutes long. Are you kidding me?
A brief dua, I guess.
Yeah. You're going to have like a heart attack at the end of all of this. Is there anybody else here who can make the dua? I'm not even joking.
Okay, inshallah,
it'll go
no
forever.
problem. We can conclude the session with that, actually.
Yeah.
Inshallah.
This poor guy, man. Can you give it up for him? He's been a real nice person. I'm sorry for the stress I'm bringing into your life. MashaAllah. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah accept from all of us, inshallah, and make this a Ramadan that brings us benefit in every tomorrow that we see in this world and leads us to the best of places in the world beyond this one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.